The Democratic Party. Remember, their rise is inevitable. We've been told this. It's one of the research projects I did. I think it's got to be like my senior year in college, not law school. The demography is destiny phrase relating to the Republican Party began in 1972. Richard Nixon won the White House in 1972. Re-election. Progressives were actually surprised that Richard Nixon won a re-election. Now, they'll say it was Watergate and all that stuff. You know, the deep irony of Watergate and what Nixon allowed to be done, the stealing of the campaign plans in the Watergate office, the Democratic Party and all that, was that he didn't need it. The Democrats had gone, they'd swung hard left. They were anti-crime. The Democratic Party of 1972 was about where the Democratic Party of today has gotten back to. And it was a blowout election for Richard Nixon. He won. He never needed to do the Watergate scandal. He never needed to figure out what the Democrats were going to do. He never needed to engage in the dirty tactics he engaged in. He was going to win because the American people were rejecting the Democrats. They had in 69. The Democrats doubled down in 72, and Nixon won. But the progressives who didn't know, remember the New York Times woman who said she didn't know a single person who had voted for Nixon. They doubled down, and they began in 1972 to console themselves with a mythology. The mythology was that the Democrats are inevitable. Very Borg-like, resistance is futile. Because the nation, by 1972, is very clear, and it became more and more clear into the 80s and 90s, the nation was browning. White people, demographically, were not going to stay the majority of the country. White people in the country, their voting share was over time going to decline. In 1976, when Gerald Ford loses to Jimmy Carter, it was inevitable. It was proof. Ronald Reagan was just an anomaly. And you know, the Democratic Party has every time, and we can go through them, and we should right now. Jimmy Carter was proof of the Republican decline. Ronald Reagan was an anomaly. Ronald Reagan was an anomaly based on the economic crisis of the 1970s, and then George H.W. Bush was a continuation of Reagan. And then when he lost, it was the ascendancy of the boomers and Bill Clinton, and decline of the Republican Party was, as predicted, going to happen with Al Gore's election in 2000. George W. Bush actually won, but he lost the popular vote. It was proof that actually the Democrats were on the rise. 2004 was a war machine anomaly, and it was stolen from the Democrats and John Kerry, and it was Ken Blackwell in Ohio who was to blame. And then Barack Obama was, of course, proof that the Democrats were inevitable and the Democrats were a permanent political majority, just like in California. And Donald Trump was the Russian stealing the election, and Joe Biden was a reversion to the mean. And oh my God, what happened in 2024? It turns out that Democratic ascendancy was always mythology. The Republican decline because of demography was always a mythology. The decline based on demographics is not real because over time, parties go through realignments. If you know anything about the history of the United States, our parties go through realignments every 80 to 100 years, and we are in a realignment period in this country. It's awkward for people. Let me just look at me, for example. Let me just use me as the example. I am a Christian evangelical conservative. I can't tell you the number of people who now think I'm a moderate or liberal. I haven't changed my positions. It's just that the party has moved towards Donald Trump, who's a populist. But a lot of people who called themselves conservatives have now moved into this populist camp, and they're like, you're not a conservative anymore. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? I haven't changed a single position. You people are now embracing like takeover of companies and all sorts of crazy economic theories on tariffs and stuff that no conservative would do. You're a populist. You just haven't recognized your label has changed, mine hasn't. And I'm like, where do I belong in the system? I'm still a Republican. I was an elected Republican. I supported Trump. I don't always agree with him on a number of issues, but I still prefer his policies to the other side. But oftentimes I feel politically homeless. The Democrats have, with the media, with the Academy, with Hollywood, they have provided a bubble for the Democratic Party to be in, feel safe in, and never have to be confronted with the drifting of their ideas. They can turn on MSNBC or even CNN. They can read the New York Times or USA Today. They can watch their favorite TV shows, and they never have to see an incursion of contrary cultural values. And so they do not know that they are a party in decline. What was that movie? M. Night Shyamalan. No, not the famous one. Not Seeing Dead People. The Village. Yes. So M. Night Shyamalan has he doesn't have a lot of good movies. It's like I feel bad for the guy. M. Night Shyamalan was the guy who wrote The Sixth Sense. Bruce Willis and the kid sees dead people, and well, spoiler alert, Bruce Willis is dead the whole time. I know, you're shocked and angry. I gave you a spoiler for a 20-year-old movie. You weren't going to watch it anyway. Go back and watch it. M. Night Shyamalan, he had a lot of movies after that. That's his most famous, and it was all kind of downhill, but he had one that was actually pretty good called The Village. And it is essentially a Revolutionary War America. These people live in this agrarian society, and there are monsters in the woods. And so the society stays together in this agrarian society. They know there are other people in the area or other communities, but they got to stay there. And every once in a while, kids decide they want to leave and go in search of other people, and the monsters get them. Or they come back because of the monsters. And it actually turns out that they're living in the 20th century, and they're in a park-like setting, in a preserve, and all the children are being raised by the adults to believe that they live in this pre-industrial agrarian society because the parents wanted to be done with civilization. They thought civilization was bad. And so a very wealthy person sets aside this land, and it's guarded by people, and it's a no-fly zone, so planes and helicopters never even fly over into the airspace. So the kids have no idea, but they're there. And it's the big reveal, the aha moment at the end. The monsters are actually the parents. And people who are kidnap the kids and do terrible things to keep the facade from being broken down. That is exactly The Village. M. Night Shyamalan's The Village is the Democratic Party. The Democrats are in this commune, and there's an entire media apparatus, academic apparatus, and cultural apparatus designed so that no one can pierce the Democrat bubble, so that the Democrats never have to know they're in decline. It is, you go to CNN, you go to MSNBC, you go to the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, it's all liberals writing for liberals, talking to liberals, persuading liberals their worldview is correct. You would think CNN, in particular, a network that claims to be really the fair and balanced network, would actually have more voices than Scott Jennings, and actually might have some anchors who reflect the worldview of a Scott Jennings, who recognize the world is more complex and the world does not bend towards progressivism, and yet they don't. So here today comes the New York Times with a big story that it turns out, let me just read you the opening sentence of the piece. The Democratic Party is hemorrhaging voters long before they even go to the polls. The headline is, the Democratic Party faces a voter registration crisis. The party is bleeding support beyond the ballot box, new analysis shows. Here's the thing about the South. In 1980, Ronald Reagan started picking up southern states against who? James Earl Carter, favored son of Georgia. Republicans started winning gubernatorial seats in the South. They started picking up state legislative seats in the South. They started picking up congressional seats in the South. In 1994, there was a big flip with Bill Clinton as the catalyst because of his values in the White House, deeply ironic now compared to Donald Trump, where a lot of Southern Democrats decided, you know what, I'm actually a Republican. I'm not one of these crazy liberals. And at the federal level, they started voting Republican, but at the state level, they continued to vote Democrat. It wasn't until George Bush in 2001 after 9/11 that the cultural shock at the federal level transcended to the state level. But here's the thing. Democratic voter registration in the South stayed very strong for a very long time, even after people had started voting Republican. Only then did you start seeing this real collapse of Democratic Party registration. But it was a lagging indicator. It wasn't in the foreground, it was in the background. People had already started voting Republican. They just hadn't changed their voter registration. Well, guess what? Same thing's happening now. Of the 30 states that track voter registration by political party, Democrats lost ground to Republicans in every single one between 2020 and 2024, often by a lot. That 4-year swing toward the Republicans adds up to 4.5 million voters, a deep political hole that could take years for Democrats to climb out of. The stampede away from the Democratic Party is occurring in battleground states, the bluest states, and the reddest states too, according to a new analysis of voter registration data by the New York Times. The analysis used voter registration data compiled by L2, a nonpartisan data firm. For measurements, few measurements reflect the luster of a political party's brand more clearly than the choice by voters to identify with it. Whether they register on a clipboard, in a supermarket parking lot, at the Department of Motor Vehicles, or in the comfort of their own homes, and fewer Americans are choosing to be Democrats. In fact, for the first time since 2018, more new voters nationwide choose to be Republican than Democrat last year. There are still more Democrats registered nationwide, but that's partly because of blue states like California allowing people to register by party, while red states like Texas do not. But the trajectory is troublesome for Democrats. Democrats went from nearly an 11-point edge over Republicans on Election Day 2020 to just over a 6-point edge in 2024. The swing helps explain President Trump's success last year. The shift also previewed Democratic weakness in 2024. All 4 presidential battlegrounds showed significant Democratic erosion. Donald Trump won them all. In North Carolina, Republicans erased roughly 95% of the registration advantage Democrats held in 2020. In Nevada, Democrats suffered the steepest percentage point plunge of any state but West Virginia between 2020 and 2024. The share of voters choosing to register with either party went down after the state adopted automatic voter registration, but the Democrat decline allowed Republicans to briefly surpass Democrats. Top Democratic strategists say the party's nationwide registration decline is a hidden in plain sight crisis that must be reversed. By the way, you want to know the punchline of all of this? You know what Democrats have been doing in the past? They've been overwhelmingly targeting Black and Hispanic voters for voter registration. The thinking of the Democratic donors now is stop registering non-white people. The Democrats now want to go find college-educated white women to register to vote. They don't want Black people. They don't want Hispanic people. They certainly don't want Asian people either. They're trending Republican as well. The Democrats are giving up on non-white voters. They're trying to become the lily white party. And what did they say starting in 1972? Republicans were the party in decline because they were the party of white people. And now the Democrats, to save themselves, are trying to become the party of white people, particularly white women. It's a massive, massive shift. This is actually kind of funny. There is Aaron Strauss, a data scientist who spent years working to elect Democrats, wrote that the old way of registering voters, working through nonprofits, enrolling young people and people of color in general rather than explicitly seeking Democrats, could backfire. Mr. Strauss argued the left needed to target its new voters more surgically because Mr. Trump's support was growing among traditional Democrat constituencies. Registering voters without regard to their political beliefs remains cost-effective for Democrats only with Black voters. With other Democratic groups, explicitly partisan groups ought to make explicit partisan arguments. There's just a problem. They're nonprofits. You're not allowed to. Only those groups of expressly affiliated with the Democratic Party are legally allowed to do that, or the Republican Party. Nonprofit groups can't discriminate in voter registration. That's the law, and they've got Donald Trump in the White House that will aggressively enforce that law should the Democrats try otherwise. This is a problem of the Democrats on making. As they've gotten rich, white, and woke, no one wants to be a part of the party.